Yo, what's up, guys? Teacher Paul here, and today we are learning about German history. This one comes from Susan, and Susan says, World War II. Can you talk about it with a German person? And what is taught in school about that time in history? Susan continues, For me, myself, I went to a German school and a Swedish school. In Germany, we had so many times in German class, in history, in English, and then we learned about how not to repeat the mistakes from the past and not letting that happen again. What are the sign for it? What are the signs for it? And what Hitler did to all the people, and went to many different places where you can learn about the history and read a lot of books about it and saw documentaries, etc. Okay. The interesting thing is you can go on a field trip and actually see the sites. I was in Berlin. I saw the Berlin Wall, what's left of it, and I also saw the memorial of the Jewish. I think it was the Jewish memorial. I don't know exactly the name of it, but it's a site with all the tombs, which is a very powerful site as well. This is a video that we're going to react to from Feli from Germany. Link is in the description if you want to check it out. And the title of the video is, Do Germans Talk About World War II? What do they teach about it, about the Holocaust? Okay, let's check this out, guys. Let's go. Yeah, I've only been to Berlin in Germany.
Do Germans talk about the Holocaust? What do they teach about World War II in school? And is it okay to make a Hitler joke around a German?
I feel like it's always okay to make jokes. Maybe,
Hello, servus,
I don't know.
and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016.
Maybe not always, but do you think it's appropriate to make jokes, guys? Let me know. A lot of people think jokes are healing, so, I don't know.
When you think of Germany, especially in a historical context, what comes to your mind? I bet at least 99% of you are thinking of Nazis, World War II, the Third Reich, Hitler, and the Holocaust. And rightly so. It's one of the darkest chapters.
I was thinking of Oktoberfest. Or, with the World Cup. But okay.
In history.
Yeah, because, there was once in history a very dark moment in history where Germany beat Brazil 7-1. But okay, I'll quit the jokes. Let's go.
Hitler and the Holocaust. And rightly so. It's one of the darkest chapters in history. I know that, you know that, yet a lot of people are unsure if this is something they can bring up around me and other Germans. Some people assume that it's a total taboo topic in Germany, something that isn't really discussed in society. But how much of that is actually true? How does Germany deal with its dark past? What is taught
I think Germany is very, very upfront with it.
about it in school? And is it okay to bring the topic up around Germans? Now, I have answered this question in different contexts before, like in this Q&A video, for example, where I gave a quick 2-minute summary, but today I would like to dive a little deeper. I'd like to talk about how this topic has been dealt with publicly in Germany over the last 78 years since the end of World War II. I'd like to share my personal experience of how it was approached in my school and my personal environment, and I'd also like to share how other Germans from different regions and of different generations have experienced this. To do so, I asked my German viewers to fill out a survey about the topic, and I received over 230 responses that will give you guys and myself a pretty good idea of how Germans in general think about the curriculums and the overall approach of how we deal with our country's dark past.
Okay, this is a great video
in Germany
so far.
In May of 1945, the Allied powers, France, UK, USA, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany into 4 occupation zones and started the process of denazification, demilitarization, decentralization, and democratization, also referred to as the 4 Ds. To denazify the country, the NSDAP, so the Nazi Party, and all sub-organizations were banned, and its laws were abolished, and all signs of the Third Reich were erased from everyday life, including books, uniforms, medals, and street names. Germany also had to make reparation
Wow, I didn't know.
payments to the
Wait,
victorious powers.
there was this street called Adolf Hitler? I mean, of course there was, right? That guy was a narcissist. Of course there was a street named after him.
And street names. Germany also had to make reparation payments to the victorious powers and other affected countries that were mainly paid in machinery, manufacturing plants, and forced labor. Most Germans were also subject to investigations by the International Military Tribunal that was looking to identify the different roles people played in the Holocaust and in committing war crimes. Germans were divided into 5 categories, from major offender to exonerated individuals. Major offenders were tried in the first Nuremberg trial from November 1945 to October 1946.
Was there the death penalty back then? Because we just watched a documentary about Norway bringing back the death penalty for all the culprits of World War II and the traitors. And that's a very interesting documentary. It is very dark, but if you want to watch it, it's on Patreon and Buy Me Coffee as well. You can watch it with me, or you can just go. It's called De Siste Dødsdømte.
12 subsequent Nuremberg trials that were solely held by the US. All in all, 36 defendants were sentenced to death.
Oh, there we go.
125 received prison sentences, 23 of them for life. Not all of these verdicts were actually executed, though. A lot of the convicts ended up being released after just a few years and pardoned from the death penalty as the denazification process became more and more lenient in the Western zones. Due to the extremely high number of cases, less severe offenders were soon handed over to civilian tribunals under German administration, and it became increasingly difficult to find a balance between punishment and rebuilding the country, for which the occupying powers needed to fill a lot of important positions. And having hundreds of thousands of Germans in internment camps didn't exactly make that easy. Now, together with the development of the Cold War, during which West Germany was considered an important ally, the focus quickly started shifting away from strict denazification and more towards rehabilitation. By 1948, countless trials were ceased or never started, and as I said, lots of people were pardoned, which to this day is heavily criticized, as it meant that people that used to be active members of the Nazi Party ended up keeping their high-ranking jobs and remained in positions of power in the newly founded West German Republic. In the Soviet
So I see a lot of similarities between like German mentality and Nordic mentality, because as we mentioned, we saw the Norwegian system, like the jail system, the Nordic in general, which is more of a humanitarian. It's more about rehabilitation. It's more about rebuilding. Now, I'd like to know about, like, what is your opinion? Do you guys think that is the right way? Or because it feels like they initially wanted to punish, and that was coming from a place of vengeance, a place of hurt. And once the country was starting to heal and recover, people started being more lenient and being more flexible and thinking more of rebuilding. I do think that rebuilding, rehabilitation is very necessary, especially because if you live thinking of grudge, you can't go forward, you can't go back. It's kind of like a restraint you have, because you keep carrying this weight and you can't really go forward because you're going to carry a lot of baggage, a lot of weight, and a lot of fear of change as well. So I do think that the rebuilding part is very necessary, especially to see where the country is today, or where the countries are today, because they decided to rebuild and keep going rather than just starting new wars and just trying to do get payback. You know what I'm saying? But what are your thoughts?
occupation zone, denazification was followed through a lot more strictly and quickly.
And we're not talking about forgive and forget. We're talking about rehabilitation, teach and educate, not forgive and forget. That's a different thing.
Soviet occupation zone denazification was followed through a lot more strictly and quickly. By spring of 1948, they had fired and replaced over 500,000 people. But how did the Germans themselves
half a
deal
million.
with the war and this dark chapter moving forward? Well, for the first 2 decades after the war, it pretty much just wasn't talked about at all. The country was full of people who were actively involved in the crimes of the Third Reich, and most common way of dealing with it was silence. Most of them weren't willing to face their own guilt, let alone take responsibility for their actions, and their families often preferred staying in the dark about how badly their own spouses, parents, and grandparents were really involved in it all. Same thing.
And I wonder if people used to hide their German, like if they were living in the United States. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would refrain from speaking German in the United States in that day and age. I think a lot of people would hide that fact.
Same thing applied to schools. Many of the teachers were formally involved with the Nazis, and the details of the Third Reich were barely part of the curriculum. It wasn't really until the 1960s that young adults in Germany started demanding from their elders to take responsibility for their past and to start an open public dialogue. Some of this was part of the 1968 student movements in West Germany that arose parallel to protests all over the world at the time. The outrage was partly triggered by different events that had taken place throughout the 60s, including the so-called swastika epidemic, the Eichmann trial, the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial, the debate about the imminent statute of limitations of NS crimes, and the election of a former Nazi Party member, Kurt Georg Kiesinger, as chancellor. As a result, West Germans finally started owning up to their country's past more intensely in the 70s and 80s. Nazi Germany.
I mean, what else are you going to do? It's history. You can't erase it. So you got to embrace it, right? In an educational manner.
Owning up to their country's past more intensely in the 70s and 80s. Nazi Germany and the Holocaust became a mandatory part of school curriculums, and TV shows like the American miniseries Holocaust, that about a third of the population watched on German TV, prompted people to reflect on the brutality of the genocide of 6 million European Jews and the emotional stories of the victims. Other notable productions of the time are the German war film
Should we
Das
watch
Brot,
that?
as well as the French documentary Shoah, among others. Today, Germany practices a very active culture of remembrance. It's all about taking responsibility for our country's devastating actions of the past and making sure that something like that can and will never happen again. This includes that it's actually illegal in Germany to deny or downplay the Holocaust. 17 other European countries have similar laws, by the way. It's also illegal to do the Hitler salute or use Nazi insignia unless it's part of art, science, research, or teaching, and the topic is a visible part of public life. Many former concentration camps have been turned into memorial sites that can be visited today to learn from the past and understand the scale of the Nazis' crimes. In addition to that, street names, memorials, museums, and stumbling stones commemorate the victims of the Nazi regime all over Germany. The Stumbling Stone or Stolperstein project was started in the 90s by German artist Gunter Demnig and entails brass plates inscribed with the names and life dates of victims that are set into the pavement outside of their last known address or workplace. You'll never know when and where you'll quite literally stumble over one, which shows that deportation took place anywhere and everywhere, and by bending down to read the victims' names, you're pretty much bowing down to them to pay them respect. To this day, over 75,000 of those stumbling stones have been laid all over Europe, making it the world's largest decentralized memorial. And of course, there are countless movies, documentaries, and books that critically deal with the Third Reich and the post-war era, and that ensure that the victims of the NS regime aren't forgotten. To this day, the historical responsibilities that Germany carries are deeply ingrained in German culture and politics. Germany has a very unique relationship to Israel, for example, and in the late 50s and early 60s, they signed contracts with Israel, with the Jewish Claims Conference, and 12 European countries regarding compensation to victims of the NS regime, some of which are being paid up to today. You'll also notice that
so Germany did right by them, because they need to take accountability of what happened, I guess. Obviously it's not going to bring back all the people, obviously, but at least they're acknowledging it and they're not hiding from it and they're trying to make it right. And I don't think there will be any way to make it right, but at least they're showing goodwill.
To victims of the NS regime, some of which are being paid up to today. You'll also notice that most Germans don't really have a very pronounced sense of patriotism. With the exception of sporting events like the Soccer World Cup, you won't see a lot of German flags, for example, not even in schools and other public buildings, unless they're government institutions. There's no such thing as the American Pledge of Allegiance, and the German national anthem is only sung on a small number of occasions. Whether that goes back to an ongoing feeling of guilt and shame, and whether or not that's still called for, is actually a much discussed question among Germans. By the way, you won't find any Nazi statues in Germany. Hitler himself actually banned any kind of memorials of him from the beginning, and other statues were either taken down by the Nazis themselves to repurpose their medal for the war effort, they were destroyed by bombings, or at the latest, taken down by the Allied powers after the war.
Was he self-aware? At some point,
what do German students learn about World War II and the Holocaust in school? Let me start by sharing my own experience.
Because here I thought he was a narcissistic person who would want his statues all over, but no, he banned it himself, which is really odd. Did he actually have a conscience, or was he building one? That's so weird.
As you guys know, I'm from Munich, which is in the state of Bavaria, and I went to elementary school and then to a gymnasium there. That's important to note because the school system and the curriculums in Germany actually differ from state to state. Now, I'm 29 years old, so it's been a while, and I don't remember every single detail, but I do know that we started talking about the topic relatively early. I think in 5th or 6th grade, and then we pretty much talked about it all the way until graduation. And it wasn't just in history class, but in a lot of different subjects. It was a very present topic in German class, for example. In 6th grade, we read a book called Damals war es Friedrich, which is about the friendship between a non-Jewish boy and his Jewish neighbor throughout the Third Reich. Then later on, we read books like Die Welle, originally The Wave, which is about a school experiment about the Third Reich. And then we also read Die Schachnovelle by Stefan Zweig, as well as Andorra and Homo Faber by the Swiss author Max Frisch. We also talked about it in religion/ethics class a lot.
She said she doesn't remember much, but I feel like she remembers quite a lot. Do you guys remember the books you read in school?
Yes, that's a mandatory subject in Bavarian schools. In arts class, we learned about what the Nazis classified as degenerate art and Art de Kunst, and the topic also came up in the context of arts interpretations. And even in music class, we analyzed the musical and lyrical features of Nazi propaganda songs. And from what I remember, the topic was also touched upon here and there in classes like English, sociology, and geology. In history class, the main focus on the topic was in 9th grade. I think we spent pretty much the whole year learning about the Weimar Republic, World War II, and post-war Germany. And that's also the year where we went to the concentration camp Dachau, which is right outside of Munich. That's something that was mandatory at my school, and I think the same goes for most schools in the area. And then the topic was one of the main focuses again in history class in 11th and 12th grade. Since I grew up in Munich, we also learned a lot about the resistance group of the White Rose, Weiße Rose, since they were located in Munich.
How is your English so good,
in other regions don't learn about them as much, but they were all students at the University of Munich, same university I went to, and they were arrested and killed in their early 20s by the Nazis for distributing leaflets criticizing the Nazi regime. And their names are very present in Munich to this day, especially the siblings Hans and Sophie Scholl, but also Willy Graf, Christoph Probst, Kurt Huber, and Alexander Schmorell. Overall, I feel like there was a lot of focus on the suffering of the Jews and how cruel and inhumane things were. We also learned a lot about Nazi propaganda and about the political, economic, and cultural factors that made World War II and the Holocaust even possible and that led people to believe in such an awful ideology. I don't really remember learning a lot about who Hitler was as a person, and I don't remember talking a lot about the details of the war and warfare. We definitely covered the timeline of the important events of the war, but I don't remember talking about single battles or which weapons and strategies were used, etc. And I'm mentioning doing this because a lot of Americans here actually know way more about all of that than I do, and I think warfare in general is just a more popular topic in the US. Now, there's probably a lot from my school days that I forgot to mention, but I do remember that by like 8th or 9th grade, a lot of us were honestly getting a little tired of the topic, and we were sometimes just like, ugh, not again. But of course, looking back, it's definitely better to talk about it too much than not talking about it enough. And I definitely say that by the time we graduated, we walked out of there with a strong awareness for racism, discrimination, and identifying populist and nationalistic tendencies and propaganda. Now, of course,
which is very, very, very important because you kind of like arm yourself against, committing these mistakes again. And you also have the educational foundation to talk about these things with other people who want to maybe use it against you. Because once you have that educational foundation, you know how to debate and even just make things more, um, make the debate more intelligent. You know what I'm saying?
World War II is something that you'll also be confronted with in real life outside of school, and that can be a very individual experience because depending on your family environment, your friends, the field you work in, you'll be exposed to it in very different ways. In my case, I definitely always felt relatively close to the topic because unlike most other people my age, it's not my great-grandparents that lived through the war, but my grandparents. Everyone just had children very late in my family, so all 4 of my grandparents lived through the war as teenagers and adults, and therefore were affected or even involved in it in different ways. One side of my family is from Upper Silesia, for example, which was German territory at the time, but now belongs to Poland. So when the Eastern Front got there, they lost their home and became refugees. They were actually part of the winter treks of January of 1945, which was historically cold, and they fled partly by foot and then started from zero after the war, like so many people in Germany. One of my grandfathers was also imprisoned in the GDR for a few years. Now, only one of my grandparents was still alive when I was born, my grandma, but I did hear a lot of first-hand stories from her, and of course I heard a lot of stories about my other grandparents from relatives, and I read about it in their memoirs. So that's my personal connection to the topic, and maybe that's also the reason why I feel extra passionate about fighting discrimination of minorities and why I believe that war is the worst thing humans have ever invented.
Exactly. I don't know why humans
now, since I'm not
are
the
always
only
at
one
war.
of 84 million people in Germany, and as I said earlier, curriculums vary a lot throughout the country, I wanted to make sure that the experiences and opinions of other Germans are included in this video as well. It actually received over 230 submissions to my survey that I sent out, so thank you guys so much to everyone who took the time to fill that out. I will say it was a lot of work to go through it all, and I won't be able to mention every single answer here, but it was fascinating to read, and I'm going to summarize it as best as I can. And I'll also be sharing quotes from the survey with you guys in German because I wanted people to be able to answer this in their native language, but I'll add English subtitles. To give you guys a general overview at first, I did get answers from people of all ages, from 13 to 65, and from all over Germany, and even a couple of responses from Austria. And to my question, how well would you say school educated you about World War II, the Holocaust, and the Third Reich? Nobody selected not at all. About 2% said insufficiently, 14% said basics were covered, but it could have been more, 47% said very well, and about 38% even selected almost too well. The topic was hashed and rehashed over and over again. So I think that shows that most people definitely felt like the topic was taught about very intensely. All other questions were open-ended questions, by the way, so I can't tell you the exact percentages, but I'd say the overall consensus was that the topic was taught in a rather objective, but also serious and very respectful way, while being brutally honest, and most people said that it was always age-appropriate still and was slowly building up throughout the grades. Carina from Dortmund wrote, for example, in der 8. Klasse haben wir erst gelernt, was das Dritte Reich war, wer Hitler war, die NSDAP und so weiter. In der 9. dann großer Fokus auf die Judenverfolgung, in der 10. Klasse dann den Krieg im Detail besprochen, Filme und Dokumentationen geschaut, die teilweise sehr brutal waren, aber einfach nur die Realität abgebildet haben. Schuld wurde uns nie eingeredet. Immer nur Verantwortung und das Bewusstsein, dass Faschismus keine Meinung ist, sondern ein Verbrechen. Corbinian from Hessen. Meiner Meinung nach wurde das Thema zwar häufig relativ brutal durch Bilder, Videos, Filmaufnahmen etc., aber dennoch altersgerecht behandelt. Häufig wurde bei Opferzahlen und Holocaust-Morden tief ins Detail eingegangen. Dennoch war die Behandlung des Themas meiner Meinung nach genauso angebracht, weil man dadurch überhaupt erst den schieren Schrecken und die unfassbare Unmenschlichkeit begreifen konnte. Es war häufig nicht schön anzusehen, doch genau so haben wir gelernt, was dieser Abschnitt der deutschen Geschichte überhaupt bedeutet. And Alex from Karlsruhe said, es war angemessen, respektvoll den Opfern gegenüber und informativ. In Geschichte haben wir uns kritisch damit auseinandergesetzt und haben uns Fragen gestellt wie: Was war die Ideologie der Nazis? Was waren ihre Ziele? Wie konnte es dazu kommen? Es gab auch einen Vortrag von Salih Perel, einem Überlebenden des Holocausts bei uns an der Schule, der für alle ab der 8. Klasse verpflichtend war. Eltern durften auch kommen, wenn sie wollten. Er hat uns davon erzählt, was ihm passiert ist und wie es ihm damit ging. Am Ende durften wir auch Fragen stellen. Zum Thema Schuldgefühle hat er etwas gesagt, das mir viel geholfen hat. Ihm ist bei seinen Vorträgen aufgefallen, dass junge Menschen oft Schuldgefühle haben, obwohl sie nichts damit zu tun hatten. Das ändert aber nichts. Stattdessen ist es unsere Aufgabe, sicherzustellen, dass es sich nicht wiederholen kann. Es gab später auch noch einen Vortrag von einem Ex-Neonazi bei uns an der Schule. In der 11. haben 2 Geschichtskurse, meiner eingeschlossen, eine Exkursion zu einem Konzentrationslager in Frankreich gemacht. In deutschen Religion haben wir uns mehr mit der Perspektive der Verfolgten auseinandergesetzt und welche Rolle die Kirche zu der Zeit gespielt hat. Unter anderem durch das Tagebuch der Anne Frank. By the way, most people mentioned that they started talking about the topic sometime between 5th and 9th grade, but a few even said it was brought up as early as 3rd grade, and lining up with my own experience throughout all kinds of subjects. Annie from Northern was
Yeah, and I like the fact that every one of them was saying that it was appropriate, it was respectful. It wasn't anything of a like sensationalism. It wasn't anything like either like patriotism. It didn't bend to different sides. It was just basically what I can understand, very educational, just very fact based, and literally thinking of helping the world be better rather than trying to find excuses or anything like that. Just straight to the point, appropriate, respectful, and favoring humanity. That is really nice to see.
and lining up with my own experience throughout all kinds of subjects. Annie from Northern Westphalia even shared her experience in a video.
I think that we talked about almost every subject. Let's see, a history class for sure, German class where we would read important literature like Anne Frank, religion, which is also part of the curriculum in most German schools, where we would not only learn about our religion but also about others, and then English class, because we also learned about history. French, same thing, French history, where we talked about the Normandy and D-Day and you name it.
Silke from Oldenburg said about this: Im Geschichtsunterricht wurde recht ausführlich über das "Wie konnte sowas nur passieren" gesprochen. Der verlorene Krieg, Wirtschaftskrise, vorhandener latenter Antisemitismus. Im Kunstunterricht ging es um die Idealbilder, die sich in Bildern, Statuen und Architektur wiederfinden, und um das, was entartete Kunst genannt wurde. In Deutsch und Englisch passende Lektüren. One person said that they watched The Boy in the Striped Pajamas in English class, for example, and in German class people mentioned reading the books I mentioned earlier, but also books like
that a
The
good
Diary
film?
of Anne Frank, Als Hitler das rosa Kaninchen stahl, or Die Blechtrommel, and movies such as Schindler's List. A few people also mentioned
Schindler's
analyzing
List.
Hitler's rhetoric as well as his speech and writing style to better understand his propaganda techniques. Hitler's own book, Mein Kampf, however, was only mentioned by one person in the whole survey, which probably has to do with the fact that up until 2016, it wasn't actually allowed to be printed in Germany due to copyright issues. So if the book was discussed in school, it was usually just in the form of extracts. In addition to learning about personal destinies from books and movies, a lot of people also mentioned visiting concentration camps. I was actually a little surprised by how many people mentioned that, especially since not every school is close to a former concentration camp. So for many, this included an overnight trip. Some people even traveled to Poland to visit Auschwitz. Charlotte from Niedersachsen said, der Besuch des KZs in Bergen-Belsen ist bei uns Standard in der 9. oder 10. Klasse, was ich wichtig fand, weil man die Dimensionen viel stärker nachempfinden kann. Zusätzlich war ein Teil unserer Klasse in Krakau-Auschwitz, was ein bis heute einprägendes Ereignis war. Von dem Lager ist ja verhältnismäßig viel erhalten und die Bilder sind mir im Kopf geblieben. Danach wurde uns auch der Raum gegeben, über unsere Eindrücke zu reden, in einer Runde mit der mitreisenden Lehrkraft. Ich würde behaupten, dass jeder Deutsche einmal dort oder in einem vergleichbar gut erhaltenen KZ gewesen sein sollte. Karina wrote,
That is crazy that the field trip, man, that must have been an amazing educational field trip. At that age, going to a field trip like this and learning, it has so much educational value. You know, it really is incredible. I remember it wasn't a school field trip, but I traveled to Israel and I saw a Jewish memorial. I think I was 12 at the time. That was an experience that literally shocked me and kind of like changed me a little bit. Well, I don't know how much it affected me because I was 12, but I remember it till this day. And it was such a powerful experience, especially seeing the story, the pictures. It was such a heavy moment for me as well. And I feel like it helped shaped my character as well.
allem der Besuch mit Übernachtung im KZ Buchenwald war eine Erfahrung, die mir bis heute, 14 Jahre später, noch sehr stark im Gedächtnis geblieben ist. Was mir retrospektiv positiv in Erinnerung geblieben ist, ist, dass nicht beschönigt wurde. Man hat uns immer die brutale Wahrheit darüber gesagt, was die Nazis den Menschen angetan haben, egal wie grausam. In addition to that, a lot of people mentioned visiting museums, memorials, synagogues, Jewish cemeteries, and things like the Reichsparteitagsgelände in Nürnberg or the home of Klaus von Stauffenberg even. A lot of schools also organized a trip to Berlin, which is actually something we did too in 10th grade, and that certainly included visiting the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe.
That's the one I was talking about.
And a lot of people
That's the one I was in Berlin.
included visiting the memorial.
The Memorial of the Murdered Jews of Europe. Yeah, so this is where I have a picture over there as well. And we went to the Berlin Wall as well. So it was an interesting trip to Berlin, and we got to see a few things and also learn a little bit about the history, which it was just I think a 3-day trip, but that city is full of history, and it was a very good experience, and also an educational experience.
To the murdered Jews of Europe, among other things. And a lot of people also said that they had historical witnesses talk at their schools, like we heard in one of the quotes earlier, which I think is one of the most valuable experiences you could have, especially since today most of them aren't around anymore. One thing that I could definitely tell from the survey was how heavily people's experiences were dependent on the teachers they had. I think that's always the case in school, of course, but I think specifically with this topic, not everyone had a good experience. Sabine wrote, for example, meine Lehrer waren von der Nachkriegsgeneration, die das Schweigen gebrochen haben. Allerdings haben sie das Thema überkompensiert. Uns wurden sehr stark Schuldgefühle vermittelt. Ab der 3. Klasse haben wir Bücher über das Thema gelesen. Die waren natürlich noch nicht so brutal, aber später wurden wir nicht geschont. Wir haben grausamste Bilder ansehen müssen und waren auch in Auschwitz oder in Israel, wo wir unter anderem mit Opfern des Holocaust geredet haben. Insgesamt hat mich die Art und Weise, wie uns der Holocaust in der Schule beigebracht wurde, ziemlich traumatisiert. Ich bin später ins Ausland gegangen und habe dort erst nach Jahren ein relativ normales Verhältnis zu meiner Nationalität entwickeln können. Heute habe ich keine Schuldgefühle mehr. Allerdings tragen wir Deutsche eine Verantwortung, dass dieses Thema nicht vergessen wird. And a person from Mainz shared another pretty negative experience. Responding to the question in what manner it was taught, they said, sehr detailliert, fast schon schwärmerisch, für die Ausländer in der Klasse sehr beleidigend. Hatten eine ziemlich braune alte Dame als Lehrerin in Geschichte. Es wurde definitiv zu oft von den guten alten Zeiten gesprochen. Ich fand es schrecklich, dass sie eine Lehrkraft zugelassen haben, die schon fast verherrlichend über so ein schreckliches Thema gesprochen hat und einem jeden, der eine negative Einstellung dazu vertrat, eine schlechte Note reingedrückt hat.
Yeah, so there are some people who were supporters of this. That is something that is inevitable. Even nowadays, we have people who support this, which is absolutely insane. But these people should not be teachers. These people should not have the power to educate. You know, they shouldn't be in these positions, which is absolutely insane. That we do see some teachers that have this access, and they are in a position to educate, but they themselves are not educated enough. You know, it's absolutely insane to think that there are people in that position. That's sickening, honestly.
I do want
What is the expression brown shirt?
einem jeden, der eine negative Einstellung dazu
You guys
vertrat,
know
eine
in the
schlechte
chat?
Note reingedrückt hat. I do want to say that this experience was definitely an exception, but I wanted to include it to show a few different aspects here. Other people were very lucky with their teachers though, like Lara from Duisburg. Ich fand, dass alle Lehrer es sehr gut angegangen haben, den richtigen Ton gewählt haben und uns auch bei schlimmen Bildern oder Videos vorgewarnt haben. Wer zwischendurch mal kurz raus wollte, durfte es auch. And there were also a few people that still experienced the time when the topic wasn't talked about a lot in school, like Katrin from North Rhine-Westphalia. In meinem Alter, zweite Generation nach dem Krieg, war es nicht sehr detailliert und wurde eher überflogen. Das eigentliche Wissen kam nicht aus der Schule, sondern mit dem Älterwerden aus Dokus. Bei uns als Schülern kam es so rüber wie: Okay, wir können das Thema nicht aussparen, aber wir machen es so kurz und oberflächlich wie möglich. Ich glaube, erst jetzt, wo wesentlich mehr Zeit vergangen ist, traut man sich und ist nicht mehr ganz so beklemmt. One question that I personally found extremely interesting, and that might even be useful for any teachers out there, is which topics were covered repeatedly and which ones people felt like weren't covered enough. The vast majority of these over 230 people that answered the survey agreed that the main focus was clearly on the Holocaust, so the persecution of Jewish people, while the persecution of other minorities like Sinti and Romani, homosexuals, political opponents, people of color, and the euthanization of disabled people, etc., were barely covered. Other aspects that people said weren't covered enough included World War II outside of Germany, including the Pacific War, but even the actions of Germany's allies or the German invasion in Greece or Yugoslavia. Those are all things that I personally agree with too. I don't remember any of those things being part of the curriculum. And a lot of people also said they would have liked to learn more about post-war Germany and the denazification process, also about the history of anti-Semitism, and that it wasn't something that the Nazis just came up with themselves, about German refugees. And I also saw quite a lot of people sharing my experience that they didn't learn a lot about the details of the war in terms of tactics, different battles, etc., and about Hitler as a person.
I think no one is born evil, and I cannot recall that we talked about what had happened to him, why he became that kind of person. So yeah, I think this would have been also important to understand.
One thing that was very interesting was that about half of the people said that they really focused on how the Nazis seized power and how the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic led to that, which is what I mentioned too, that was focused on a lot in my school. But then the other half listed this under things that weren't covered enough. And many also said it should have been talked about more how we can recognize warning signs and parallels of similar developments in society today. And last but not least, this
And I think that's the most important. People trusted their leadership because of what he was saying. It was the fake news. It was the fake narrative, and he was fueling something that people kind of like related to, and he was like mongering, and I feel like people didn't see him as evil back then until they noticed, wait, it actually is. And I think the same thing happens today with a few leaders around the world. People actually support their leader, but there is, when it comes to war, there's the physical war and there's the information war. So I feel like the information war is the most important one, because a lot of people they fall for the manipulation, and you can see a lot of people around the world have different opinions when it comes to different leaders, but people inside that country might have a very supportive view on that leader. And this happens not only with one specific country. That's why I'm not naming countries, but it happens with many different countries where the whole world has an opinion about your leader, but you yourself don't understand why. And that's the main reason is because the narrative is shifted according to where you are getting your information from. And nowadays also with all the fake news, all the AI, it's even the line is even more like blurred. And I don't think people back then believed that Hitler was doing all of these bad things, or if they did believe, they thought it was for a good cause. Because I don't think anybody in their right mind would support or tolerate a leader or even allow them to stay in power without or knowingly that he was doing all of these things. You know what I'm saying? I think it was a false narrative, and it's important to identify when the leader is doing that. So I think that's an important thing to educate people on, to understand when and how you're being manipulated, especially nowadays where things get really blurred because of AI. You don't know who to believe, and the same story can be twisted in various different directions. So it's very, very important for us to be able to distinguish and also filter all the information we're getting so that we won't fall into this trap and unknowingly support, one of these crazy, crazy leaders which will do crazy, crazy stuff.
and parallels of similar developments in society today. And last but not least, this was a
Let's hear that again.
Many also said it should have been talked about more how we can recognize warning signs and parallels of similar developments in society today. And last but not least, this was a common point of criticism as well. Ich bereue auch, dass ich so wenig über andere geschichtliche Themen gelernt habe. Der Holocaust und der Zweite Weltkrieg hat alles überschattet. Which I would generally agree with. We really didn't get to cover a whole lot of other topics of recent history, but at the same time, I also think that it was important that we covered the topic so intensely, like Markus from Hildesheim says too. In der Schule hatte ich immer das Gefühl, dieses Thema wäre überrepräsentiert. Wenn ich jetzt mitbekomme, wie schlecht einige darüber informiert sind und wie diskriminierendes, rassistisches und rechtsradikales Gedankengut in und rund um Deutschland wieder aufkommt, wünsche ich mir, dass all diejenigen sich nochmal gründlich damit beschäftigen und damit dafür sorgen, nichts aus dieser furchtbaren Zeit auch nur ansatzweise zu wiederholen. Britta from Berlin says, bei mir kam die Message, dass das
This is something that is very important as well, because I know a few people, older people, that they're very nice people, they're very good people, but they're not aware of their racism. They're not aware of what they say is really racist. And I feel like the older generation, they kind of like downplay those things, and for them they're like, "Oh, nowadays everybody's so sensitive." But when in reality there are things that they just don't notice, they just don't notice. And that's a very important thing to, I feel like they're desensitized from it, but it's a very important thing to talk about, because there are things that are blatantly racist, but like even saying, "Oh, the good old times," those type of things, people don't think about it much, but in reality sometimes those are really racist statements. That's crazy. Like, oh, so I feel like it is important for us to be more self-aware and be more in tune of who we're talking to and what we're talking to them about and how we're saying things. That's why sometimes I'm really careful of what I say, and sometimes even I make a few mistakes and a few slip ups. But it is important to make sure that we're educated in that situation, because we all grow up in different places and with different people around us, with exposure to different things. So it is important to be aware. Even the smallest thing, if you're going to a different country and you're doing things that is offensive to that culture, it might be very harmless to you, but it's important for you to understand what you did and why you did it and how you did it, so that you won't do it again. You know, there are a few things that we do as tourists that we have no idea, but it doesn't mean we have to downplay it and say, "Oh, no, no, in my country that's fine." I know it might be fine in your country and in your upbringing, but if somebody is telling you something, they're trying to educate you. So you must be respectful in that culture, in that situation. And I feel like a lot of streamers nowadays, they don't really care. They actually probably do it on purpose when they travel. And I'm thinking of a specific case here, specifically in what happened in Korea and Japan and Philippines. You guys, if you know, you know.
Nur ansatzweise zu wiederholen. Britta from Berlin says, bei mir kam die Message, dass das auf keinen Fall nochmal passieren darf und während den Anfängen definitiv rüber. Ich hatte auch noch viele 68er-Lehrer, deren Lebenswerk es quasi war, das Schweigen zu brechen. Ich hoffe, dass die jüngere Lehrergeneration das Erbe weiterführt. And even Laura, who became a history teacher, said this.
Nice.
Natürlich habe ich zwischendurch, wie wohl fast jeder deutsche Schülerin, das Gefühl gehabt, dass es zu viel thematisiert wird. Im Nachhinein finde ich es aber gut. Es hilft heute sehr dabei, rechte Parolen wie Gaulands Aussage, der Nationalsozialismus sei Vogelschiss gewesen, einordnen zu können. In terms of how present the topic is outside of school in Germany today, people shared a lot of different opinions and experiences, and I won't be able to include all of them in this video, but many mentioned, for example, that some German TV channels pretty much show Nazi documentaries 24/7, which is definitely true, and I know that that can be pretty surprising for people visiting Germany. Some people said that the current political developments all around the world worry them and that they feel like German politicians should be more actively fighting that. Some mentioned how this whole topic of inherited guilt, Erbschuld, is still weighing on us as a country, but most people said that they think that Germany is doing a rather good job dealing with this topic, even though it's not perfect, and that it's important that the German government commemorates the victims of the NS regime on days like the International Holocaust Remembrance Day or on German Volkstrauertag and other memorial days. And some people
Yeah, I think that's important. I think Germany has an important role right now because Germany has experience and Germany has the ability to identify patterns. So Germany needs to look at other countries and kind of like just tell them, look, listen, we have been educating our population on this and we see patterns. And I feel like there is this responsibility to share their experience, and we have a lot to learn from Germany, because the whole idea here is that is this taught in schools enough? So if the idea is that this wasn't taught in German schools before a certain time, can you imagine if it's taught in other countries? Now that it's being taught in German schools to an extent that people understand it, comprehend it, and learn from it, it doesn't mean that the other countries are doing the same thing. So there are people who are growing up in different parts of the world that don't know this, and they're not as sensitive, or their eye are not as clinical as a German's eye for the tendencies. So I feel like people around the world might be falling for the same trap as Germany did when Hitler was, a promising, hopeful leader, which I think that's the consensus, is that that's why people saw hope in him, which he was promising a lot, and I feel like people thought that he would be the person who would take Germany out of that dire situation, which ended up being horrible. And I feel like people nowadays are also looking for hope, because we've been through very hard times as well, especially during the lockdown. A lot of people saw the economy drop. Everything just went downhill from there, and we're still recovering. So anybody who steps up and promises hope and change, depending on how they say it and how they do it, people will end up voting for them and putting them in leadership positions. Now, they might be the best or they might not be the best, but I just feel like Germany has a clinical eye when it comes to these things. And what she's saying is true. I think Germany should be involved because there are a few things that are happening around the world where the nationalist movement is like grown so much, and whether it's going to end up safe to live in this world or not, we don't know. We still don't know. But I feel like a lot of discussion and education needs to go into this so that we won't see history repeat itself, because history does repeat itself quite often. We just need to learn how to identify and prevent these things from happening once again. But it feels like from the news that we're getting all over the world, it feels like we haven't learned much, have we?
Also shared how difficult it can still be within their own families. I'm just going to read one quote from a young German that represents that pretty well. This is from Vivi, 18, from Lüneburg. In der Gesellschaft ist das ganz unterschiedlich. Es gibt halt so zwei Lager. Die einen finden es nicht genug, ich ebenfalls, und die anderen zu viel, darunter auch viele Jugendliche. Gut finde ich den Umgang in den öffentlich-rechtlichen Medien. Gerade zum Beispiel Kika hatte eine gute Kampagne, um es den Kindern näher zu bringen. Der Krieg und ich heißt das, glaube ich. In meiner Familie wurde viel totgeschwiegen. Gerade was die Leute so gemacht haben. Alle meine Urgroßväter waren im Krieg und teilweise Jahre danach in Gefangenschaft. Wer weiß, was für Gräueltaten sie damals begangen haben. Jedoch arbeiten meine Mutter und ich viel auf an Kriegstraumata und Fluchtgeschichte. Meine Großeltern kamen als Kinder aus Ostpreußen. Jedoch sind einige in der Familie immer noch der Meinung, dass darüber nicht gesprochen werden soll. Einige haben ihre Schuld und Geheimnisse bereits mit ins Grab genommen. Last but not least,
Thank you,
is it
Susan.
okay to ask a German about World War II, the Holocaust, and Nazis, or is that offensive coming from a foreigner? Now, I didn't include this in my survey, but based on my experience, I can say yes, you can absolutely talk to us Germans about World War II. I even feel like a lot of Germans appreciate talking about it with outsiders from another country, especially when they find that they're educated on the topic. However, it's definitely important to us to stay respectful. I found that Germans can be a little more sensitive to jokes about the whole topic, for example, and not every German is going to be in the mood to talk about it, especially if people are still in school or just graduated and might be a little tired of the topic.
Exactly.
But generally, this is something that we're very open about in Germany, and most of us will not feel personally offended just because you bring up our dark past. Let me know if you guys agree with me on that or not in the comments, but I recently came across this video by Radical Living.
Hey Hans, I was wondering, since you're German and all, do Germans still feel like guilty about World War II? How do you feel about it? Are you hungry? You look hungry. I'm gonna make us some sandwiches, okay? Be right back. I mean, your grandfather must have fought in the war, right?
I love you.
You ever
Thank you
talk
for
to
the
him
coffee
about how it
request.
was, being on the evil side and everything? Oh God, I think I forgot the sausages in the car. I'm gonna go grab them, okay?
And then he just ends up making up more and more excuses and ends up driving away because he really wants to avoid talking about the topic. And even though I know it's satire, of course, and I'm not trying to deny that that's his reality, I just wholeheartedly disagree with the message of this. That's just never been my experience at all. By the way, just in general, it's a lot more common in Germany to talk about politics and difficult topics, even with strangers. And that's also why Germans often ask Americans very directly about controversial topics in the US and how they feel about them.
I see.
Again, thank you.
Yeah, Germans are very direct, aren't they? They're very straight to the point, no beating around the bush.
To everyone who took the time to fill out the survey, and to Annie for recording a whole video. You can find her entire response on her YouTube channel, by the way. If you went to school in Germany, what are your experiences with the topic? Which aspects would you like to add? And if you're not from Germany, how does your country teach about World War II or their own difficult past? And was there anything that surprised you in this video? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy my content, it would be great if you hit that subscribe button. You can also send me a super thanks underneath or support my channel via Patreon or by buying me a coffee. This is where you can find me out.
There you go, guys. Go buy her a
Or
coffee.
support my channel via Patreon or by buying me a coffee.
There you go. Go support her.
This is where you can find me outside of YouTube. And with that, I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!
Tschüss. Yeah, that was a very well made video. You know, she's very good at explaining things. She's a very good teacher as well. And I like how well structured her video is. It's no wonder she got 5.2 million views on this video, because it's very well discussed. It's very well elaborated. Pretty awesome video. And it's very educational too. It gives us some insight on how people are dealing with this dark past. And I feel like people are afraid of talking nowadays. You know, there is this discussion of free speech, but at the same time, it feels like we are not free to speak, especially because if we say anything that remotely, even in a small manner, offends someone, they will attack you with all they have. They will kind of like take that small thing and use it against you, even though they might be misconstruing it, or they might be misunderstanding it. It feels like people, and I've experienced this on YouTube as well. Not talking about World War II, not talking about anything controversial, but let's talk about like a guitar video that I did. I got someone in my comment section talking about something that I had no idea what he was talking about, but they came into my video with a pre established knowledge or opinion of something else they saw in some other parts of the internet, and they applied that onto my video, which I had no idea what they were talking about. And we're talking about guitars here. And they started accusing me and then saying I pretended that I didn't know what they were talking about, because they watched another video of another person talking about another thing involving that guitarist. And I feel like people sometimes they gather this knowledge from other places and they come at you with it. You know what I'm saying? So it feels like nowadays it's so hard for us to speak about things. But I feel like it is necessary, and especially where there is this history, this dark history, it is important to be knowledgeable about it so that you can talk about it, especially if you are, for example, from Germany, to talk about the history of your country. Because people might come with fake news or fake knowledge and fake facts and try to embarrass you. And if you're not well prepared, and if you don't know, you're going to believe them, and you're going to feel guilty, and they're going to be able to manipulate you with these false information, you know. So it's very important for us to learn these things. What do you think? Do you think we should talk more about these things, or should we reserve and just retract from not saying anything? What do you think? In my opinion, I think it's important to talk about every topic and understand people, and understand that there are people who aren't as well versed and people who aren't as well spoken, you know, and sometimes they might mess up and say a few wrong things. I feel like that's important as well. But let's keep the conversation civil in the comments. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's very educational. And thank you so much, Susan. We did take double the time it of the video. So because I added a lot of commentary to it. So I hope you still enjoyed it, even though it was double the video. But I think it's important and it's interesting. And I like learning with you guys. So thank you so much for joining in. We're live on Twitch if you want to come join us. And if you do want to support my channel as well, go over to Buy Me Coffee or to Patreon. You can watch reactions to full movies, series, shows, concerts. And if there is any movie or series you want me to check out, there were a few that she mentioned, which is interesting, then just tell me. We're going to add it to the wish list. I think Das Boot is going to the wish list. We have talked about this a few days ago. So I guess that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts. And, you know, I hope we can learn more about these things without any taboo and be able to talk about them in a civil manner, I would suppose. I would hope. And let me know if you guys think the world is going to a similar pattern or not. Or do you think we're safe? We're okay for now. See you guys soon. Take care for now. Click over here for more videos. Bye-bye.